So I just want to first, I'm going to be speaking English. My French I understand a little bit, but not very much. I'm very grateful for interpretation right now. I do that every day at my work, mostly with Spanish and English. Spanish is the main language that we speak in our community space. But I want to just first, I'm going to stand up because I need more energy. And I'm very excited to see how many people are here and to learn about Montreal in this visit. It's my first time in Montreal, so it's been a lot of learning, a lot of listening. From my own experience as an immigrant from Colombia to the United States, I know that concepts of colonization are already very different in different countries, right? So the history in Colombia is vastly different from the one in the United States. And that has really affected the way that race and class and gender and all these things are understood and how they make themselves into the different areas of our society. So the first thing I really wanted to do was share very briefly about the place where our work is grounded in Queens, because it's a place that not a lot of people know a lot about. When they think about New York, Queens is not what people think about, right? So up here is Manhattan, where the center of the art world market is, and where so many important museums and galleries are. And if you travel all the way to the green spot out there, is where the Queens Museum is, and just off of the park in the green, the station before, is a tiny community space. It's smaller than this space we're in, right? And it's called IMI Corona, or Immigrant Movement International Corona, right? Even the name is already this weird mixture of cultures, because IMI is how you would say IMI in Spanish, right? But it's an English word, Immigrant Movement International, right? So from the beginning, it's just the way that people experience things. They're already mixing and matching and doing all of these things. But that's in a very, very, it's far. It can take you an hour, 15 minutes to get from this area in Manhattan to where we are in Queens. So that in some ways is, some people might think about it as an limitation. You're so far away from the art world, you know? You're so far away. On the other hand, it's also a possibility, because then who you are in conversation with, who you are being responsible to, shifts and creates different spaces for that. And that's, I think, what has allowed a lot of the things that have happened in that space to flourish. So I just want to mention a few things about the neighborhood. The neighborhood immediately where IMI is located, 70% of the population is foreign born. 30% of the population doesn't speak English. 25% or more of the population is undocumented. 21% lives below the poverty line. And it's also the most densely populated neighborhood in New York City, which is a lot, right? And in that immediate area, 10 blocks around the area, 95% of the population is Latino, with kind of different waves of immigrant communities. In older years, 50, 60 years ago, it was Italians, then there was a lot of African Americans that migrated from the south of the United States after slavery, and then there's Dominicans, Ecuadorians, Mexicans, Peruvians, Colombians. So even though it's Latino, there's also all these different cultures that are happening there. In kind of the broader area, it's one of the most diverse as far as ethnic origin, right? So we have immigrants from all over the world. Really, there's areas where 167 languages are spoken within a few blocks. And so that's really the context that we're working in. It's really a heavily immigrant, heavily working class neighborhood, of people that are already, like as an immigrant, you're already in this in-between space. So for us, I mentioned it because I think the context in which we're in is super important. It's super important to think about like how we move and how we think, and to denormalize, right, the assumed audience of where art happens, or who we're talking about, or when we talk about what are people bringing to the conversation through their lived experience to the things that they're dealing with every day, and how do we respond to that. But so before this is the street, right? This is our space. Right here, if you go up the stairs, it's like going up into here, and you have a tiny space that we're gonna see in a little bit. But this is our community council, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that. But before I go into talking about the work that we do, for me, and some of the work, it's like we're really, really grounded in community practices, right? In building with each other and believing that everybody who is in a conversation is contributing something, whether it's by their experience and their understanding or whatever. So since I'm just now getting to Canada and trying to understand a little bit of the context in Montreal, I'm wondering if like we can have like maybe like 5 or 6 people share with me a little bit of like how you understand like something about colonialism in or colonization in Montreal that maybe I should keep in mind as I'm sharing with you the work that we do in Queens. For me, the purpose of being here is to be engaged in this conversation with everybody, to have it be useful for the work that is happening here long term. And so I would really love if maybe a few people would want to like maybe share your name and share something you think I should know about colonization in Canada, in Montreal.
I will say something.
Okay.
It's as an immigrant, of course, bear with me. It's a place where 2 colonial powers have been struggling for many, many years, and it's weird as an immigrant to live through those 2. One, obviously, there's complaining each other of oppression, but you know, it's still 2 historical colonial powers. It's really hard to. It takes you a lot of time to understand that there is signs of oppression in history, but still, for you, when you see them, they're like, you know, the French and the English. You know? They're historic colonial powers, and it's hard to understand, and it takes actually years to kind of understand the subtleties in that struggle power or power structure in Canada.
For me, I'm an immigrant in Quebec. They forgot they were a colonial power as well, because there was the English after, and historically Quebec is struggling to be free or to be independent from the English colonial powers, so they have a lot of difficulty to see themselves as oppressor toward the minorities and toward the native people. And this is, for me, it's the base of the issue of the relation between Quebec and all the diversities living in this country. Because it's very hard when you see, forever yourself as an oppressed, it's very hard to accept to see yourself as oppressor.
Any other thoughts or things that I feel like this is really important to know about colonization in Montreal, the way it's understood here?
Yeah, food is very separated. You have Little India, Little Chinatown. In McGill, Concordia, you can see many people from different backgrounds, but they are all students. And then after they leave, or they go to their own little quartier. It's like more a mosaic than really multicultural. That's what I think.
Rhonda. I guess the only thing I can add is that the myth of Canada and Canadians as being tolerant, open, having all of these good and noble qualities is I think one of the layers that sort of fogs over the realities that other people have mentioned of really an unspeakable continuing colonial violence that people live all the time, every day in this country. So.
But it's better than Europe. There's so many European people are further from So if you
Another thing too about, my name is Samuel. Another thing about Montreal is that it's almost all the people in Quebec who self-identify as belonging to a visual minority reside in Montreal. Outside of this city, in this province, there's very little diversity. So it places itself, in a very particular relationship with the rest of the province and Quebec identity.
In that aspect, I wanted to add that there was the debate about la charte de valeurs, about value, and I really felt that as the immigrants in Montreal, we should be like the Vatican, a completely separate, because our issues are completely different. In that sense, yeah, it is a different entity. In Canada, compared to the States, from what I understood, here there is a tolerance of the diversity. In the States, you chose to be American, be American. You have to learn the language and forget about your culture. Here, it's a hypocrisy. Yeah, be that, then you are just of those. So the decolonization is a very important aspect. First of all, I have to say, 50% of us, the women, we are also need the process of decolonization to begin with as a society. And then there is a very important, I feel it very important discussion about me, the immigrant, in comparison to the native people. I was not here when the residential schools happened, where the 60 school kids, where the cultural genocide was happening. Do I feel Canadian when I am talking towards a native person? Or not? Am I excluded or not? So we have many issues that I know in the States there exist too, but that is our reality. And
yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. And definitely some of the things that I've been kind of noticing and hearing over the last day. I've only been here like a day and a half. So this is why it feels really important for me to hear from you about this. And I'm gonna kind of be going back and forth between the things we're talking about and sharing a little bit about the space and the work we're doing and the history. But the space began, so this neighborhood in Corona is right the neighborhood that's really close to the Queens Museum. And the Queens Museum in New York, every borough, right, there's 5 boroughs, the Bronx, Staten Island, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, and each of them has like an art institution. The Queens Museum is that. And the Queens Museum, in part because it is like so remote, and in part because there was this vision of how do we respond to the community immediately around us. And that work started about 12, 15 years ago, doing things like street festivals or lending the space in the most densely populated neighborhood, right? Space is such a premium. Space is so needed. So sometimes lending the space to community organizations that were not doing art things or anything to do things, and through that building relationships with people in the neighborhood for the museum to really see itself as a neighbor. But in 2011, the museum started a collaboration with Cuban artist Tania Bruguera, and to start this space, Immigrant Movement International. And at the beginning, Tania's vision actually was to start a political party for immigrants, but due to kind of the laws in the United States, a nonprofit cannot fund a political party. And so that kind of shifted the idea into creating a movement, a space for movement building. And I think that, to be honest, I cannot talk very much about the first year and a half when Tania was really, really present in the space, because at that point I wasn't in the space. But it was, at the beginning it was really informed by her practice and her aesthetics and visions for the work. But also, pretty quickly, anytime that you are working with people, other people that come into the space are going to inform the work that is happening, right? And this is some of the criticism I have of the way that what sometimes is known now as social practice or community engaged art or all of this, it sees only the artist as the person who conceives, as imagines and produces, right? Because the reality is that once you are on the ground with other people coming in, the work shifts and grows according to the reality that people are doing. You cannot have community art on your own, right? So people don't have to participate in your project, they don't. So there needs to be, there's always a negotiation that happens where people need to feel invested enough in what is happening to participate, and through that process begins a process of co-creation. So about a year and a half into the project, the idea was to transition so that the direction of the project would no longer be under the initiating artist, but that it would be led by a community council of users, of people from the neighborhood that had been deeply invested in the project. And of course, some of the challenges that come up is that folks in this community maybe have not had formal experiences of leadership positions, or like some folks may not have had formal education, may not have, all of these things. It's an intergenerational space. How do we bring in? Maybe there's a really big commitment to art making, but not understanding context of like the international and contemporary art world, which is something that was kind of grounded within Tania, right? So part of the work I was brought in on how I came into the space was to help transition the project from the direction of Tania to building a community council of users that would lead the direction of the space and help grow. And so that's the process that we have been doing for the past 4 years. And like this is some of the people in our council, right? Right now, the youngest person in our council has 10 years old. And the oldest person is in their 60s, and they have the same power of decision making. They have the same power of conceiving and of doing work. And honestly, some of the most amazing work as far as like intellectual thought that is like really radical is being done by really young people, right? And so like there's all these ways in which that challenges like how we show up and perceive and how we imagine, because the reality is that in our neighborhoods, in our communities are not just like college educated 30-year-olds, right? it's more complicated than that. So we're trying to think about how to build a movement and how to think about art and thought that affects people and helps us towards that struggle, towards inspiration, towards imagining the many words that exist within a world, like the Zapatistas was saying, like Nuria was saying, right? There needs to be space for all of us. And we need to figure out how to negotiate where different people are at and how there can be space to challenge, right? So there's this term that gets used a lot, safe spaces, right? For us, a safe space is not a space where everything is comfortable. It's the opposite, right? Safe space is the space where we can really be uncomfortable with each other. A space that we build and push and move through. And that is particularly important because the way that a lot of the narratives for immigrant, the movements for immigration justice, at least in the United States, the kind of trajectory, it's really important to understand that from the beginning, immigration law has been racist, at least in the United States, right? The first immigration law in the United States was the Chinese Exclusion Act. From there on, that's what it's all built upon, right? The first people that were kicked off the United States was Native Americans, right? Because back then it was 13 colonies and they were kicked out of their land. They were the first people deported from the United States. Who were the first people that were constantly asked for papers in order to be able to move through the United States? Was black people, right? Former slaves or slaves that were freemen were constantly asked for papers. So these ways the police emerged from the people that were put in charge of chasing after runaway slaves. So these institutions that are now built upon are deeply racist origins. And everything is built on those origins, and so it's something we contend with every day. But some of the narratives around immigration justice have always been around we are not criminals, we're workers, or all of these notions of respectability, right? Of we deserve to be in this country because we are workers and we are respectable, as opposed, and right now it's been a shift that is a really important moment when there's also a consciousness building of, even people who are in this country who have citizenship, right? Black people and Latino people, Chicanos who have maybe been there since generations, right? Chicanos who talk about how the border crossed them and they didn't cross the border, right? They're being murdered by the police, by the state, right? So, and they have historically been murdered. So there's this moment of actually back to silence, right? And back to thinking about Audre Lorde said, your silence will not protect you, right? So thinking about, okay, so where are we as people, as community, why are we trying to assimilate, respond? All of that doesn't make us safe because our humanity is not valued at a basic level, right? Within the structures that we live in. And it's been a moment that I think is really connected to this notion of decolonization, which is about challenging respectability politics and saying we no longer are asking for just say, for example, we're not politely asking for amnesty. We are saying fuck ICE. ICE, right? Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Fuck ICE is the thing you will see most often, right? There's a chant that goes, la migra, la policía, la misma porquería, right? So, and it's ICE, the police, the same old shit. That a lot of the young people who are known as dreamers, dream activists, have been chanting, and that tone is about saying not only are we asking to be able to is no longer about integrating seamlessly into this society that doesn't value people like us. It's about saying, actually, we will not be ashamed of the way we are, the things that you name as too much, too loud, too brown, too queer, to all of these things, is a refusal to comply and a refusal to disappear and be silent, right? And historically, there's been a lot of ways in which that has shown up. But that's a lot of the work that we're doing that is like a consciousness building as well. So, so I wanted to show a video that is work that we did last summer through currently, and some of that had to do with also a very particular focus over the last 2 years to build a community base, an organizing base in the neighborhood to begin to participate more directly in social justice kind of movement, and a lot of what people told us through like community focus groups and conversations was that they wanted to like also participate in to affect change in the schools. But I think what's really important is that there was a shift in the way that like some of the projects and residencies were done in the space. So in a lot of spaces that are community spaces, artists propose projects and they develop them with the community. But this project was actually developed through community conversations. We would meet and talk and think about. We would conceptualize things and then invite artists to support us with skills that we wanted to, for projects that had been conceptualized by a community, right? Projects, so artists were being invited to help produce work that had been conceptualized in collaboration with a 10-year-old, right? With somebody who had never been to school, maybe didn't finish primary school. And so from there is like what I'm gonna show you is kind of like a little bit of some of the documentation of that work that we ended up doing. The Monstrita developed as a giant paper mache piece that was, we had like a festival where it ended up being in the 3 different schools and kind of walking from the schools to our local plaza. And at the plaza there was a performance. Each body part had a performance piece that had been done. There were speeches, right, all of this. And it was really clear because the purpose of this actually was to connect a lot more parents and young people to the organization to continue to build a base. So it's like a long-term vision of we don't do, this is not a social club where people come and hang out for themselves. It's not a clique, right? It's not about you safeguarding this special space we've built for yourself. It's about actually building community power by getting commitment and investment over the long term and doing political education through that. So throughout the summer, when we were building stuff, like we were having these deep conversations with these young people and parents. We're meeting there, for example, one time and we're like all covered up in wheat paste doing this. You're gonna see it in the video. And I hear these girls talking about, there's all these conversations about bullying in schools, right? Bullying is like the term you hear all the time. And they're talking to each other and they go, can parents be bullies? There's like silence. Another one responds, well, I mean, I guess parents punish you, but maybe they're allowed to, so maybe they're not bullies? Silence, they're thinking. The other one goes, but one of the demands we have for our schools is that we want less punishment and more healing and conversation. So why then do we think it's okay for our parents to punish us? That there is like, for me, super radical thinking. Super radical thinking from like 10-year-olds that are really questioning the ways that they're policed in different spaces and what feels acceptable and not, right? And they're having these conversations among each other. So for me, that's what happens in those spaces, right? So I can't really share about this work because it's like 5 years of experiences like this, right? And that you are there and you live it and you breathe it. And so it's like really a live thing. And at this point, it doesn't belong to anybody and it belongs to everybody in that community. And that's really important. Because to this day, everybody is like, oh, Tanya's project, right? And that's understandable because that's the way that things are packaged and moved within the art world. But the reality is so much more powerful than that. It's about like, at that point, nobody owns that more than those girls probably, you know? So we're gonna see a short video, and then I would love, that video kind of brings together this idea of the way we're trying to challenge the kind of internalized respectabilities, and then also kind of show some of the work. And we've been trying to think a lot about these monsters, right? What is monstrous within us? And what parts of that monstrosity do we claim? Are we unapologetic about? And then which parts do we also recognize as really dark? The reality is that racism exists within all of us, because that's one of the things that's amazing about oppression. The most genius things about oppression is that you can internalize it, right? So you don't need always somebody to be doing it if you have it within you, if you yourself have it. So facing those monsters as well, facing the monsters that we want to claim and the ones that we want to like name and make something else, but recognizing them as real within ourselves, feeling like a really important part of the work. So I'm gonna just play a video.
Ahora ilumina el corazón.
Soy un hechizo de comunidad.
Más agua fría.
Échale agua fría, échale agua fría.
Se van a quemar las manos un poco.
Cuidado. Ya, cuidado, cuidado que sale el engrudo. Cuidado que sale el engrudo. Sale, hoy.
Soy cuerpo consumido y reciclado. Soy cartón, moreno caucha, jona, narizona, bembona, orejona, bocona, y ni mis manotas pueden con mi corazón. En la tierra, como en la gente, busco calor, aliento y presión para brotar. Soy cuerpo pintado, cortado, acariciado, amasado, apapachado, trabajado y entregado.
When I was in school, a lot of times I would be really interested in like craft materials, right? And I was always being told like, oh, you have to be really careful because you are a woman and an immigrant. And it like is gonna be assumed as feminine work. It's gonna be assumed as like ethnic work, whatever, right? But then like, I just remember so clearly, there was like a white man who came and was doing this like antique, like hand, like craft-like traditions in like this really feminine fashion. And it was like, this work was so radical because he was making it, right? And that I think is like also part of this history that like who gets to use certain materials and name them as high art, and who do those materials get to speak and why. So for us, it's been really important to put aside that and be like, we are okay if people look at it and just say, this is just community art. If they can't see them, that's too bad for them. you know? Because we are there living and experiencing, and we know the way that it's like having really radical conversations in our neighborhood, the way that it's like really developing a nuanced sense of like material and aesthetics all across, and having conversations and making spaces really come alive with art, in an art that doesn't feel separate from people, but an art that really feels like it's informing life for people, and that people have agency in creating. So that's the work we're trying to do, and we're trying to really support the growth of artists that are coming through from the community. So this video was produced through a year, like there's an artist who's now a filmmaker who's doing a year-long residency. We shifted our residency program so that people wouldn't come for like a month, but rather so that we can support a local artist for a year, so that they could support us as well, right? So that the projects are not distracting from the work that the community is trying to build long-term, but rather helping create ways to share it that still feel like the language of the community, that still feel like they can be in conversation with multiple spaces, right? And so all of these switches, I think, are small but significant. They're really important to the way that then these people who now have been with us for a year, who grew up in the neighborhood, who are undocumented immigrants themselves, have access to develop as artists, and at the same time are invested in this organization, in this community, long term. And that for us feels like the way that we build a strong community where we can support each other and defend each other, especially as like things get more intense. The only way that we feel like we can really survive is by building real relationships and real networks. And where people don't feel used, where people feel like when they show up in a space, their voice, their participation, their thoughts, their ideas, their souls really matter. So that's what we're trying to build, and yeah, I'm just looking forward to maybe having some conversations now that bring together the three conversations we had. Is this available online? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can share a link.
I would like to know how was the reaction of the community, because you went on the streets, so how was received what you did?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people in the neighborhood are also getting used to us because we are always doing things, right? And this action was kind of like strategically designed to be a friendly action, because it was an action where we wanted to reach out to families to become involved with us, right? There have been other actions where we have used much more aggressive language, and where we have like literally taken over the street and blocked traffic and done things like that, you know? And but I think that like there is a lot of joy that people have of seeing this like giant pieces. Like before we went, so we were stationed, each of the body parts was in a different school in the neighborhood, right? They're all within a couple of blocks with each other. But when they were there, like I was with the hands, and like people came up to me and were like, that's art, right? Right? That's art. Tell them that's art, because I told them that's art. And like, it's like people like had this thing of like, that's art, I know that's art, and like having this like joy of seeing like, and they were like, but what are the hands for? Why do they have nails? Why are like all of these questions that people have when they encounter like objects that like stir their imagination in the street, you know? And then, I mean, it was like really amazing, because when we were coming up with a plan for this action, we had like these giant post-its with all the things, we had all the plans, and I had one-on-one meetings with each member of the council to like really go over the plan and think from their thoughts if something was missing. And when I met with Evelyn, who is like one of the young girls, she was like, I really think there's something that is missing in this day that I feel like it would be really important. I'm like, okay, Evelyn, it's like 2 days from the event, but tell me what this thing is. And she's like, we need cake. She's like, it feels wrong to have this festival without cake. right? And so, but it was like this amazing idea because we had these huge cakes, and then so many people came, right? And like, it's just so basic and thoughtful, but it was like a really smart tool that then we had all of these families gathering for cake and like interested in signing up, and the girls then were like telling other people like, I told them to get cake, and there's cake here, and so people start to feel like, oh, you join and you get to say what we do, and like all these things kind of like have these different effects. So that festival was like a really, really fun day. Lots of people came out to participate. We needed for the performance was conceived by about maybe like 15 people, but we needed a total of 50 performers. And so like there was a call made, and within like two kind of our brother community networks and people who are connected but maybe not part of like our leadership core. And within a day, 50 people had already committed to participating in this. And it's just like really exciting to see. And we had like people who committed to doing like face painting, people who committed to doing like outreach and activities, people who committed to doing legal counseling for people. Like all of these things were filled within like a day or two. And that comes from working in a certain way over years, right? And from people really be feeling invested in it. And then, you know, so like this particular action was really fun to do in the street. At the same time, like we were at the schools, and like the security guard in the school was like, this is not approved by the school, you have to be across the street. And so, you know, stuff like that is annoying too, because the way public space is policed is really real. And so, you know, we'd be like, okay, we'd cross, and then we'd cross back, and then they'd come and like tell us to move again. But then like we'd be surrounded by kids, and they'd be helping carry, and then they would like chill, you know. So it's like all these negotiations all the time. But that happens, you know, all the time.
So I'm gonna have to leave soon, I apologize, and it's ironic that I'm saying that, because one of the things that struck me in all three presentations was just this idea of timeline, and taking time. And I think one of the traps we tend to get into, especially in artist-run centers in Montreal or Canada, where we have these very sort of prescribed like programming cycles and funding cycles, which I tend to frame and limit the way we can imagine projects existing in time. And I think that by listening to all three of your... Oh, désolé, je disais en anglais. Mais c'est ça, en écoutant les trois présentations, cette idée-là d'échéancier ou de temps me paraît importante et évidente. Et je pense que c'est quelque chose que je ressors de la présentation, l'importance de passer au-delà des cadres de cycles qui souvent, je trouve, nous limitent dans notre capacité d'essayer de faire du travail qui a peut-être un impact plus profond pour pouvoir justement faire des ponts plus sincères et plus organiques. Justement, merci de...
Mais moi, j'espère que, vous savez bien, on a eu comme aujourd'hui une perspective des artistes latino-américains qui sont à la diaspora. Comme vous, Silvia, ça fait 16 ans que tu es à New York. Nouria, ça fait 13 ans qu'elle est à Montréal. Moi, ça va faire 19 ans que je suis là. Mais ça serait intéressant avoir d'autres perspectives des artistes, de femmes artistes, qui viennent aussi avec d'autres bagages. Alors pour moi, ça c'est comme, je dis, le début de cette conversation était en 2015 avec démocratie, mais je pense que c'est un dialogue qu'on peut développer. C'est comme continuer à l'ouvrir. Je pense que à la centrale, il y a l'intérêt pour le faire. Mais c'est sûr que des fois, il faut se sortir de certains schémas, souvent, pour permettre ça. Mais oui, et que ce dialogue peut prendre différentes formes. Aujourd'hui, c'est comme une sorte de visite, conférence, dialogue, mais à un moment donné, ça peut prendre toute une autre forme complètement différente.
La question du temps, je pense que ça va être intéressant aussi pour les artistes, parce que quelqu'un qui vient d'arriver, de quelqu'un que ça fait 19 ans, puis pour vous aussi, et je ne sais pas aussi pour Silvia, J'imagine qu'il y a un parcours de réflexion. Toi, tu l'as nommé un peu. C'était pas dans la demande qu'on vous a faite, mais ça serait intéressant de voir comment vous allez changer dans la réflexion, Silvia dans son expérience à Queens, et Nouria aussi. Donc, le dialogue se fait aussi avec des personnes qui sont ici dans des temps différents, parce que c'est un regard, un vécu très différent, et donc le vécu de l'artiste est très différent.
Moi, c'est pour ça que j'ai lu mon texte de maîtrise au début, parce que ce texte, c'est comme un récit justement des moments pour je suis arrivée ici. Et au début, j'avais l'édition. Après, j'étais complètement perdue et avec le désespoir. Et comment petit à petit, j'ai construit comme... Mais ça serait super génial qu'on puisse avoir des espaces où nous, on puisse rentrer en dialogue avec des artistes qui viennent juste d'arriver ou qui ça fait 3 ou 4 ans qui sont là. Et ces échanges, je trouve que sont nécessaires. Absolument.
Yeah. Something that I also like from what the person who was here but left had said that really resonated with my experience in New York is this idea of like when groups are really separate from each other, and that being a really, really real challenge. Because in Queens, like I said, there's like so many different groups, and a lot of them there's a lot of new immigrants, there's a lot of folks who are really working class, different levels of formal education, and learning other languages is really challenging. And I think people also like feel really protective of their languages and wanting to relate to each other. Like anybody who's an immigrant will tell you that it's not the same to build relationships with people in a different language than in your native language, right? So people gravitate towards staying within each other. But for us, one of the challenges that we've been trying to work really actively right now is how to build really real bonds with people from other ethnic groups. And we've done it we're lucky to be in a place where there's a lot of different grassroots organizations that serve different immigrant communities, and we're working kind of long term to build relationships that are real and solidarity between each other and our members. And so just saying that's like also we've been working now together for a year, and it feels like we're just starting to scratch the surface on that. So going back to time, like the way that these like shifting the way we relate to each other and the way that we learn from each other requires a lot of time and requires a lot of commitment. And like one of the things that is talked about a lot, I feel like it's a big part of the like notion of contemporary art is like the autonomy of art, right? And this idea that that's where the true power of art comes from, because it's the way that art can speak truth, right? Because it's autonomous. And for us, a lot of what we've been thinking is like the flip side of autonomy, which is accountability, right? And accountability, like I know that in Spanish there's not an exact word for it, but that it includes kind of like responsibility to, it includes like who do you respond to, but like who are you committed to, right? All of these different things. And so like this notion of like what would an accountable art look like? And that is something that is like constantly trying to think about then who do we respond to long term, and what does that mean building with each other, or like how does that shift the practices that we're in? If we're not then accountable primarily to the art world, then how do we move beyond these cycles, right? If we are accountable to building a community where art is for everybody, right? Where art is like a right and for people, then how do we need to switch and understand that maybe we have 3 timelines happening at once, and how do we move with each other?
I think that there is a difference between 2 kinds of immigrants. The immigrants that want to change economical situation, and the refugees. that came here because they were active in their countries, and they are here not because of choice, but their level of social involvement is already very high. And I think that makes a difference in the application. And your example about the two girls that are talking, this is the beautiful they're learning about democracy. They're learning about taking full power over their lives. They're talking about non-violence, not even from their parents. But this is not always the interest of people that came to change, to improve their life situation. So I think that it talks differently to those populations.
I mean, I think it's definitely, those things are also connected, right? A lot of people, like economic violence is also real, right? And economic violence is also something that has reasons that it exists in our country, which have to do also with colonialism and neo-colonialism, right? So pushing somebody to feel like they have no other choice than to move because otherwise they can't sustain their family. Like most people, I know, most people, right? Even those who want to improve their economic situations, like don't necessarily want to migrate either, right? It's not an easy process. Mm-hmm. So I think that that dichotomy is more complicated. It's like messier to think about like the reasons that people migrate or not. And some of it, like, it's also going back to what we have internalized, right? The messages of like improving ourselves a lot of times means moving up in class, becoming more white, like whatever it is, right? So it's like a lot to untangle there, and who feels like they have agency to do what, or like in what spaces and at what cost, because it has different costs to different people as well.